This is the Superpowered Mind podcast for inquiring individuals who are tired of the struggle for peace, happiness, and clarity. I'm Claire Diamond, ready to help you explore the principles of the mind, the self, and reality to unlock ultimate mental freedom. This podcast is the one to listen to if you're ready to experience the capabilities of the superpowered mind. Hello, welcome to episode 4. Today we're looking at a very big, very important topic: how trauma influences our perception. Trauma is a distressing event, frightening, distressing, upsetting event that we can't cope with, that the body-mind system in that period of time doesn't have the capacity to assimilate it, to acknowledge it, to recognize what's going on within the body in relation to it, to talk about it, to find a way through it. And so often these traumas happen during childhood because the child is completely dependent on the caregiver for their survival. And when those survival needs aren't met, when the child is being brought up within an environment of danger or abuse or lack of safety, lack of emotional capacity and support, where events are happening that are frightening, that trauma, if there isn't the support there for the child in that moment to deal with it, that trauma becomes part of the body, part of the mind, and in particular, we've talked about this superpowered human brain and mind developing all the time, and as a child, so incredibly active and formative. And so in this environment of insecurity, the child's mind is forming all the time beliefs and rules and protocols and understanding and meaning of who that child is, of what that child is, what the I is that all this is happening to, and of what the world is. And so this traumatic experience that could either be a single event or an ongoing endurance, it becomes what we are in a very real sense. And it's not just trauma events that are becoming what we are, it's all events. So everything that is going on, all experiences are generating through belief, through the acquisition of rules and meaning, they are generating a sense of self and a sense of the world. And they're generating requirements for what it means for me to be okay. What does it mean in terms of stability or attention or noise or lack of attention or praise or absence? All of these things are starting to be formulated as what I need to be okay. And this isn't happening in any sort of discrete local place. This is through the whole system, the whole body mind. Everything is involved in that learning process. And what this means now is that all our experiences create the perspective and viewpoint and lens through which experience takes place. And actually that lens is a creative place. The lens itself is creating the experience. So for example, my father died when I was 10, and that was in 1980. And at that time in Cardiff, South Wales, there just wasn't, therapy wasn't even, I'm not sure it even existed at that time. The school, when I went back to school after the funeral, not a single teacher mentioned anything. My form tutor didn't say anything. It was just, my mother didn't have any support from her work, or there wasn't the practice of awareness of how to help people through trauma, I don't think, at that time at all. And so I don't think that ever was really processed. And it stayed in me, and I can see it now. And I wrote a book about this. It's not you and it's not me, especially in terms of my relationships with men, in holding on to relationships long after it's obvious that it's not doing either of us any good. And so what's being created through that lens of unreconciled grief and loss and trauma and insecurity and fear and need, men are being created, relationships are being created from that perspective. So the Claire self that is lost really in these relationships and the partner in these relationships, they're all a function of that original grief and loss. They don't exist really as objective truths. They are experiences, ongoing experiences created from that space of trauma. As Terence Real said, there's no such thing as overreaction. It's just that what we're reacting to might not be what's happening right now. So in other words, the reaction is because of the past. The experience is because of the past. It's all happening because the lens and the belief system, the conditioning through which life is lived is creating ongoing repetition of that original trauma. And on our courses, we speak about being re-traumatized because the original trauma, unresolved, projects out. So it might be, for me, 43 years later, that original trauma projects out and creates a reality of a Claire and a man, say. And because that relationship, this current relationship in 2023 isn't working, it's reconfirming that original sense of loss and lack and being bereft, being abandoned. So the projection creates evidence for the original trauma, which solidifies the original trauma. It means it's even less healed, even less dealt with, because all the time, everywhere we go, there's reconfirmation of it. To see this is brilliant because it starts to point everything in the direction that experience isn't reliable, ever. Experience isn't, well, actually, it is reliable when it's an experience of unconditional love, absolute peace, absolute accountability for the entirety of that experience, absolute immersion in that reality. Yeah, those are reliable experiences. Those are a mind that is clear of these delusions. But for the most of the time, when we're in suffering, when we're in feeling separate, we're feeling like a victim or a villain, we're feeling not good enough, we're feeling lacking and incomplete. In those moments, the experience is just a projection of the past. And to see this is the glimmer of freedom. This really starts to open up this space of inquiry. What is actually going on here? Instead of that cycle now, the re-traumatization cycle, where there's just an unconscious living, unconscious identified mind that everything looks real. Whatever I think I am is real. Whatever I think the world is real. And from that space, all experience is just reconfirming the belief system. And so from that space, our lives can shrink. We withdraw. We go into more and more conflict. We get more and more confused. The belief system gets even more embedded and robust. And so there's just this life just becomes this ongoing cycle of deeper and deeper confusion. And that's when everything is coming from this desperation. I'm desperate to be happy. I'm desperate to find what I think I need. I'm desperate to have this man, because I think that's what's going to stop me feeling this lack. But that desperation just keeps the whole circus in place. And it means the trauma is never actually dealt with. And instead, through this conversation, it starts to be an invitation every time we feel that suffering, that sense of lack and separation. That is an invitation to really see what is going on. So to turn the mind into inquiry, just as we were looking at in the struggle podcast. When we move into these areas that are really confronting, and we start to get very honest with ourselves, really accountable and humble, really. Wait, what is really wanted here? And how is my behavior in this problematic? And how does it look like I want one thing, but actually all my behavior is acting in the opposite direction? These sorts of things start to reveal how the trauma is playing out as a form of confusion and incoherence. And so that moving deeper in to the very situations that we might well have avoided all our life, but moving deeper in from this sense of inquiry and this openness to feeling the emotions, maybe having support at this time, support in terms of body work perhaps, or support from a non-dual therapist, always recommended to talk things through from the perspective of no actual independent self is so powerful. And to move in, to keep moving deeper and deeper in, to see that actually our deepest fears, our deepest shame, our deepest insecurity, they're just belief systems that don't hold any grip anymore. They're just on their way out. And it's through this process, this extremely healthy process of really seeing that our perception, when it's experienced from this place of struggle, is completely unreliable. And that stops that cycle and starts to open up a new possibility. A bit like on the film Groundhog Day, when it's going round each day, same thing, but each day something a little bit different, a slightly different perspective, a opening, a question, a recognition, a conversation maybe, everything just slightly different. And each time round, there's a bit more space, a bit more capacity, a bit more accountability, a bit more honesty. And that is how trauma is assimilated, really. It doesn't go away as an experience. And again, this is something we look at in our courses, that actually these pivotal experiences in our lives actually are our superpower. When they're not assimilated, when they're not healed, when they're electrified within the body-mind, creating these projections and confusion, then the whole system is in sort of breakdown mode, really. But when every moment of every day is understood for what it really is, which is an invitation for the wholeness of what we are to be acknowledged and recognized and allowed, then these enormous events, they stop being this really a child in the driving seat, totally not wanting to be in the driving seat, but actually running all decisions, all perception, all behavior, all addictions. Instead, that child moves out of the driving seat into the back seat. And now the child's allowed to be there. It's okay. This thing happened. That's okay. And it becomes part of us in the sense of true wholeness. No inner war going on. It's just allowed. We're allowed to be there, fully, truly recognized. And that now starts to become really the superpower of that individual body mind. Because from that deep knowing of that experience, that there's a capacity, a compassion, a profound understanding, a perspective on the world that is completely unique. And from that place, which is absolute peace, really, through this process, we move out into the world with a voice and a leadership, really, that is completely unique and doesn't need anything. It doesn't need anything in terms of satisfying that ego identity. Doesn't need anything in terms of withdrawing or going into battle. It's completely complete. And so now there's just curiosity, more learning, more conversations, more talking. I read this lovely quote the other day: desire everything, need nothing. And that is the healing process, desiring everything, moving out into the world for the playground it really is, needing nothing in terms of stabilizing that ego identity. And that comes about through this conversation, through moving deeper into the world and having the feelings instead of avoiding them, actually having them, having these experiences that we've shied away from, but which actually in reality turn out to be nothing like what the mind was projecting. So this is a really big topic, and thank you so much for listening. Yeah, this is one for all of us, I think, in our own ways. Thank you for listening to Superpowered Mind with me, Claire Diamond. If you want extra support in the exploration of your mind, download our exclusive subliminal recording, especially for podcast listeners, on bit.ly/podcast subliminal.